November 7th, 1942, Lyon, France. A woman with greying hair stood at her apartment window, watching Gestapo agents search the building across the street. Her trembling hands held a match inches from a stack of coded documents that could execute every resistance fighter in southern France. What Klaus Barbie didn't know as he flooded Lyon with 500 fresh agents was that the woman he called the most dangerous of all Allied spies had already vanished, by bicycle, with one leg. This is the story of how Virginia Hall, an American woman rejected by her own government because she was missing part of her left leg, became the spy the Third Reich feared most, and how a wooden prosthetic named Cuthbert would help her cross a mountain range that should have killed her. The spring of 1933 had promised everything Virginia Hall wanted. At 27, she'd secured a position at the American consulate in Smyrna, Turkey. She spoke French, German and Italian fluently, studied at Radcliffe and Barnard, and spent years positioning herself for a diplomatic career. Her dream was simple: become America's first female ambassador. Born on April 6, 1906, in Baltimore, Maryland, Hall had grown up in privilege. Her father was a banker. Her mother wanted her to marry well and restore the family's dwindling fortune. But Hall had other plans. At Roland Park Country School, her yearbook called her the most original in our class. She wore men's clothing when it suited her. She once attended school with live snakes wrapped around her arms as bracelets. She hunted instead of attending debutante balls. Her mother was horrified. Her father quietly encouraged her independence. Hall studied at Barnard College, the women's division of Columbia University. Then Radcliffe, Harvard's women's college. She completed graduate work at American University in Washington. Then she went to Europe. The École Libre des Sciences Politiques in Paris, the Consular Academy in Vienna, universities in Germany, where she perfected her language skills. By her mid-20s, Hall could discuss philosophy in French, negotiate in German, and charm in Italian. She had the education, she had the drive, she had everything except what mattered most to the State Department in 1932. She was a woman. The U.S. Foreign Service employed over 1,500 people. Only 6 were women. There had never been a female ambassador. There were no plans to appoint one, but Hall persisted. She secured a clerk position at the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw in 1931, then a transfer to the consulate in Smyrna, Turkey. It wasn't diplomatic work, it was filing papers and answering phones, but it was a foot in the door, and Hall intended to kick that door wide open. On that bright afternoon in December 1933, Hall joined American friends for a snipe hunt in the Turkish countryside. The birds were small. The terrain was rough. Hall climbed over a wire fence, shotgun in hand. The gun caught on the wire. It discharged. The blast tore through her left foot at close range. They were miles from the nearest hospital. Hall's friends wrapped the wound as best they could. By the time they reached medical care, infection had set in. The doctors in Smyrna tried to save the leg. For days, Hall endured agony as they fought the gangrene, but the infection spread faster than their treatments could stop it. The choice was simple: amputate or die. On a December morning in 1933, surgeons removed Virginia Hall's left leg below the knee. She was 27 years old. Recovery took months. The pain was excruciating. Hall was fitted with a wooden prosthetic leg that weighed 8 pounds. It had an aluminum foot. It was held in place by leather straps attached to a corset that wrapped around her waist. The stump required constant care. The friction from walking created blisters that became open sores. Most people would have retreated to a quiet life. Hall named her prosthetic Cuthbert and learned to walk again. She practiced for hours. First with crutches, then with a cane. Finally, without assistance. The prosthetic had no ankle joint. Every step required her to swing the entire leg forward. It created a distinctive gait, a limp that would become both her greatest vulnerability and her most famous characteristic. Hall returned to work at the consulate. She requested to take the Foreign Service oral examination, the opportunity to finally become a diplomat. The rejection letter arrived within weeks. The department regrets to inform you that individuals with disabilities are ineligible for Foreign Service positions. Your physical condition makes you unsuitable for overseas work. Hall read the letter 3 times. Then she resigned from the State Department. If America didn't want her talents, someone else would. Hall moved to Paris in 1939. She'd lived there before, during her studies. She knew the streets, she knew the language, she knew the culture. But the Paris of 1939 was different from the Paris she remembered. War was coming. Everyone could feel it. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. On September 3rd, Britain and France declared war on Germany. Hall immediately volunteered for the Service de Santé des Armées, the French ambulance service. She drove a converted truck marked with red crosses. She transported wounded soldiers from field hospitals to larger medical facilities. She worked 18-hour shifts. She learned to drive with one leg while dodging shell craters. On May 10, 1940, Germany launched Fall Gelb, the invasion of France. Hall was stationed near the front lines. She watched German Stuka dive bombers scream overhead. She heard the thunder of panzer divisions crushing French defensive positions. She saw the flood of refugees clogging every road. For 6 weeks, France fought. For 6 weeks, Hall transported the wounded, men with limbs torn off, men blinded by gas, men who screamed in their sleep. She saw what modern warfare did to human bodies. She saw what happened when evil wasn't stopped. On June 14, 1940, German troops marched into Paris. On June 22, France surrendered. The armistice divided France into 2 zones. The northern occupied zone, controlled directly by Germany. The southern free zone, governed by the collaborationist Vichy regime. Hall refused to accept defeat. She made her way south, then to Spain, then to England. In London, she walked into the US Embassy and requested a position. Any position. She needed to work. She needed to fight. They gave her a clerk job, filing papers, answering phones, the same work she'd done in Turkey. Hall endured it for months. She worked during the Blitz, when German bombs rained on London every night. She slept in underground stations. She filed reports while buildings burned around her. And she waited for an opportunity. It came in February 1941, a chance encounter with a man who knew someone who knew someone. A phone number scrawled on a piece of paper. The Special Operations Executive, Churchill's Secret Army, the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Hall called the number. 3 days later, she sat across from Vera Atkins in a nondescript office near Baker Street. Atkins was Romanian Jewish, though few knew it. She spoke perfect English. She had ice in her veins and fire in her eyes. She was responsible for recruiting agents to send into occupied Europe. Most of them never came back. Atkins looked at Hall's file. American, multilingual, knowledge of France, motivated, missing a leg. "The work is dangerous," Atkins said. "If you're captured, we can't help you. The Germans don't recognize the Geneva Convention for spies. They'll torture you for information. Then they'll execute you." Hall didn't hesitate. "When do I start?" When Hall applied to the State Department again in 1934, the rejection was swift. Not because she was a woman this time, because she was an amputee. "Individuals with disabilities," the letter explained, "are unsuitable for foreign service positions." The woman who would organize the largest resistance network in Nazi-occupied France had been deemed unsuitable for a desk job. Most people would have accepted defeat. Virginia Hall drove an ambulance into a war zone instead. By May 1940, Hitler's armies had swept through the Low Countries and crashed into France. Hall volunteered for the French ambulance service. She transported wounded soldiers from the front lines while German Stukas screamed overhead. She wore men's clothing because it was practical. She learned to drive with one leg because she had to. And when France surrendered on June 22, 1940, she made a decision that would change the course of the war. She went to London, and she volunteered to become a spy. The woman who interviewed Hall in a dingy London office was Vera Atkins, British spy master, recruiter for Winston Churchill's Special Operations Executive, the inspiration, many believe, for Miss Moneypenny in the James Bond novels. Atkins looked at Hall's application. American, fluent in 3 languages, first-hand knowledge of French geography, missing a leg. "You're hired," Atkins said, not because the SOE was progressive, because they were desperate. In August 1941, not a single British agent remained operational in France. Every network had been rolled up, every operative either captured or dead. Hall would be the first woman the SOE sent to live and work in occupied France. Her cover story was thin but plausible. American journalist for the New York Post. Her code name was Germaine. Her mission was simple in concept, nearly impossible in execution. Build a resistance network from nothing, in a country crawling with Gestapo, with a wooden leg that clicked when she walked. Hall arrived in Vichy, France on August 23, 1941, the so-called Free Zone, unoccupied by Germany but controlled by the collaborationist Vichy government. She travelled by train from Lisbon through Spain. Her American passport allowed her to cross borders that were closed to British citizens. Her journalist credentials from the New York Post gave her a reason to be there. She carried 2 suitcases. One contained clothes, toiletries, and the mundane items a journalist would need. The other contained 50,000 francs, code books, and instructions for building a resistance network. Hall established her base in Lyon, a city of 400,000 people. Medieval streets wound between Renaissance buildings. The Rhône and Saône rivers converged there. The city sat at the crossroads of southern France. Perfect for a spy network. Her first task was simple: survive. Hall rented a modest apartment on the Rue de l'Hôtel de Ville. She registered with local authorities as a foreign journalist. She introduced herself to other American correspondents. She cultivated a reputation as serious but unremarkable. She avoided restaurants where Germans congregated. She never spoke German in public, though she was fluent. She dressed conservatively. She became forgettable. Her New York Post credentials were real. The newspaper had agreed to the cover. Hall filed actual stories about life in Vichy, France, cultural features, human interest pieces, restaurant reviews. But embedded within each article were coded phrases. The cathedral bells rang 23 times, meant 23 German divisions were moving south. The cheese market featured exceptional Roquefort, indicated a specific factory producing munitions. Train service to Marseille remains reliable, meant the railway was vulnerable to sabotage. Her editor in New York forwarded each story to SOE headquarters in London. There, analysts decoded the real intelligence. Within weeks, Hall had established a pattern. Every Tuesday, she visited Café Neuf on Place Bellecour. She ordered coffee and read newspapers. French resistance members knew to approach her there. The signal was simple. If she wore a red scarf, the meeting was safe. If she wore blue, danger. Her network grew slowly. Hall recruited with surgical precision. She never approached anyone directly. Instead, she waited to be approached. A waiter who mentioned he'd fought in the Great War. A librarian who asked suspicious questions about German regulations. A shopkeeper who cursed the Vichy government under his breath. Hall listened. She remembered. She made mental notes. Then she'd return days later, drop a casual comment, gauge the response. If the person seemed reliable, she'd suggest meeting again, somewhere quiet, to discuss mutual interests. Hall's recruitment method was brilliant because it appeared accidental. No one could trace the network back to her. Each person believed they'd sought her out, that they'd convinced her to help. Within 3 months, Hall had 90 active agents. Among them was Jean Rousset, a gynecologist who treated women across Lyon. His medical practice gave him perfect cover. He could travel anywhere without suspicion. He could meet anyone. Hall convinced Rousset to recruit his patients. Women who worked in German offices, women who cleaned Wehrmacht barracks, women whose husbands collaborated with the occupiers. Each woman became a source of intelligence, careless conversations overheard, documents left on desks, names mentioned in passing, and Rousset's clinic became a safe house. Wounded resistance fighters received treatment there. British agents hid in examination rooms. Weapons were stored in the basement beneath medical supplies. Hall's most audacious recruit was Germain Guérin, owner of Lyon's most exclusive brothel. Guérin's establishment served German officers exclusively. Wehrmacht majors, Luftwaffe pilots, Gestapo agents seeking recreation. These men talked, especially after drinking, especially to beautiful women who seemed impressed by their authority. Hall met Guérin through a mutual contact. She made her proposal over coffee. "You serve them," Hall said. "I want to know what they say." Guérin smiled. "They say everything." Guérin's employees became Hall's most valuable intelligence sources. They learned about troop movements from drunken majors. They discovered factory locations from engineers seeking companionship. They identified Gestapo agents from careless boasting. And Guérin made several apartments available as safe houses. Germans would never think to search a brothel for British agents. It was too obvious, too ridiculous, which made it perfect. Hall also recruited Catholic nuns from the convent of St. Joseph. Mother Superior agreed to hide escaping Allied pilots. The convent had secret rooms built centuries earlier, designed to hide priests during the French Revolution. They worked just as well for hiding American airmen in 1942. Hall's network expanded across southern France. She established contacts in Marseille, Toulouse, and Nice. Each city had a local coordinator who reported to her. Each coordinator recruited their own agents. The structure was deliberately fragmented. If one cell was compromised, the others remained intact. Hall was the only person who knew the full scope of the network. She communicated with London using an American diplomat at the US consulate in Lyon. George Whittinghill agreed to carry messages in the diplomatic pouch. Information that would normally take weeks to transmit reached London in days. Hall's intelligence was extraordinary. She provided detailed maps of German defensive positions along the French coast. She identified factories producing war materials. She reported on morale among Vichy officials. She tracked the movement of German divisions. SOE headquarters rated her intelligence as consistently reliable and actionable. But Hall's greatest contribution wasn't intelligence. It was rescuing Allied personnel. When RAF bombers were shot down over France, surviving crewmen faced a grim choice: surrender and spend the war in a prisoner camp, or try to escape. Those who chose escape needed help: food, shelter, false papers, and a route to Spain. Hall created an entire escape network. She called it the Underground Railway. Downed airmen were instructed to make their way to Lyon, to the US consulate, to ask for Olivier. Olivier was Hall's code name. She would provide the airmen with civilian clothes, French identity papers forged by her network, money for train tickets, addresses of safe houses along the route to Spain. Between August 1941 and November 1942, Hall helped 47 Allied airmen escape France. Each one returned to England. Each one went back to flying combat missions. The SOE estimated that Hall's escape network saved Britain the equivalent of 2 bomber squadrons, the cost of training replacement aircrew, the value of their experience. It was an astonishing achievement, but it came with risks. In October 1941, French police raided an SOE meeting in Marseille. The operation had been planned for weeks. 12 agents were supposed to coordinate their networks, share intelligence, plan sabotage operations. Someone had betrayed them. French police surrounded the building. They arrested everyone inside, 12 SOE agents, including Georges Béguet, the only wireless operator still active in France. The arrests were catastrophic. Without Béguet, London had no way to communicate with agents in France, no way to send instructions, no way to coordinate operations. Hall had been invited to the meeting, but something felt wrong. Call it instinct, call it paranoia, call it the sixth sense that keeps spies alive. She didn't attend. When news of the arrests reached her, Hall's blood ran cold. 12 agents in French custody. The French would hold them for now, but eventually they'd be transferred to the Germans, and then the torture would begin. Hall knew what happened to captured agents. The Gestapo had refined interrogation into a science. They started with psychological pressure, isolation, sleep deprivation, threats against family members. If that didn't work, they escalated. Beatings, electric shocks, waterboarding, methods that left no visible scars but broke the strongest wills. Most agents lasted 48 hours before talking. The bravest lasted a week. Everyone broke eventually. If the 12 captured agents talked, they'd expose dozens of resistance fighters. They'd reveal safe houses, drop zones, and escape routes. They'd destroy years of work. Hall had to act fast. The captured agents were being held at Mozac prison near Bergerac, a fortress built in the 19th century, thick stone walls, guard towers at each corner, armed patrols day and night. The British had written off the prisoners. Impossible to extract, the assessment read. Focus resources elsewhere. Hall ignored the assessment. She needed intelligence from inside the prison. She needed to know the layout, the guard rotations, the vulnerabilities. Georges Béguet provided it. Béguet had convinced the prison guards he was a harmless academic. He spoke perfect French with no accent. He wore glasses and looked bookish. The guards gave him minimal supervision. Béguet began mapping the prison. He timed guard rotations down to the minute. He identified which guards could be bribed. He studied the locks on the barracks where prisoners were held. Then he smuggled out a letter. Getting a message out of Mozac prison required creativity. Béguet befriended a prison trustee who delivered food from the kitchen. He wrote his letter in invisible ink, lemon juice on plain paper. The letter appeared blank. He folded it inside a hollowed-out book. The trustee carried the book to a priest who visited the prison. The priest passed it to a resistance contact. The contact brought it to Lyon. Hall received the book on a Tuesday morning. She heated the pages over a candle. The lemon juice turned brown. Words appeared. Béguet's message was detailed. The lock on the barracks door was a standard French military model. He could pick it with the right tools. But he needed files, wire, and lock picks smuggled in. Hall had an idea. She recruited Gaby Bloch, wife of one of the imprisoned agents. Gabby visited her husband every week, bringing food and supplies. The guards searched her packages, but not thoroughly. They were French police, not Gestapo. They weren't expecting sophisticated smuggling. Hall purchased tins of sardines. She carefully opened each tin from the bottom. She removed half the sardines. She placed lockpicks, files, and thin wire inside. She resealed the tins with solder. The modifications were invisible. The tins weighed the same. They even smelled like sardines. Gabby smuggled in 6 tins over 3 weeks. The guards never noticed. Inside the prison, Begay worked. He used the files to shape the wire into a lockpick. He practiced on other locks until he could open them in darkness. He timed his work to coincide with guard rotations. By July 1942, Begay had created a key that could open the barracks door. He sent another message to Hall. Ready to proceed. Need extraction plan. Hall coordinated with her network. She arranged safe houses between Mozac and the Spanish border. She secured vehicles for the first leg of the journey. She obtained civilian clothes and false identity papers for each prisoner. She stole 2 French police uniforms from a corrupt supply sergeant. The escape was scheduled for July 15, 1942. At precisely 2 a.m., when the night guards were changing shifts, Begay opened the barracks door. 12 men walked out, quietly, carefully. They crossed the prison yard during the 30-second gap in guard coverage. They climbed over the south wall using ropes they'd made from torn sheets. By 2:05 a.m., all 12 prisoners were outside the prison. They split into groups of 2 and 3. Each group had a different route to the first safe house. If one group was caught, the others might escape. The escape wasn't discovered until the 6 a.m. head count. The prison alarm sounded across the countryside. French police established roadblocks on every major road. German forces were notified. Gestapo agents flooded the region. 500 agents searching for 12 men. But Hall had planned for this. Her safe houses were in farmhouses and barns miles from any road. Her contacts moved the escapees cross-country, through fields and forests, avoiding towns, travelling at night. One by one, the groups made it to Lyon. The journey took 3 weeks. Some groups were nearly caught at checkpoints. One man twisted his ankle and had to be carried. Another fell ill with fever and couldn't move for days. But Hall's network adapted. When one safe house became too dangerous, they found another. When one route was blocked, they discovered an alternative. By August 11, 1942, all 12 escapees had reached Lyon. Not one had been recaptured. Hall met each man personally. She provided them with new false papers, money for the journey to Spain, contacts who would guide them over the Pyrenees. Within 2 months, all 12 men had made it back to England. The SOE's official historian would call the Mozac prison break one of the war's most useful operations. Several of the escaped prisoners became leaders of major resistance networks. One, Philippe de Vomicourt, established the largest sabotage network in northern France. Another, Ben Cowburn, trained over 300 resistance fighters in demolitions. The escape had a strategic impact beyond the individual men. It proved that SOE could conduct complex operations in occupied territory. It demonstrated that French police security was penetrable. It showed resistance fighters that someone was willing to take risks to save them. Morale across the resistance networks soared, but it also had a consequence Hall couldn't have predicted. Klaus Barbie noticed. Barbie arrived in Lyon in November 1942, 30 years old, already legendary for his cruelty, appointed chief of the Gestapo for a reason. Klaus Barbie was born in 1913 in the Rhine Valley. His father had been a teacher, a bitter, violent man who beat his son regularly. Barbie learned cruelty early. He joined the Hitler Youth at 17. the SS at 22. By 1940, he was working for the Gestapo in Amsterdam. His specialty was breaking resistance networks. Barbie understood that resistance movements depended on trust. Remove that trust, and the network collapsed. So he planted informants. He turned captured agents into double agents through torture. He spread disinformation to create paranoia. In Amsterdam, Barbie had destroyed 11 resistance networks in 18 months. Now he'd been sent to Lyon to do the same. The Gestapo knew Lyon was the heart of resistance activity in southern France. Every major network had connections there. Every escape route passed through the city. And someone in Lyon was running an operation that made the Gestapo look incompetent. The Mausac prison escape had embarrassed the Reich. 12 enemy agents walking out of a French prison, vanishing despite a massive manhunt, making it back to England. Someone had organized that operation, someone brilliant, someone with extensive local contacts, someone the Gestapo hadn't identified. Barbie's orders were clear. Find that person. Destroy their network. Make an example that would terrify anyone else thinking of resisting. He arrived in Lyon with 500 additional Gestapo agents. He established headquarters in the hotel terminus. He converted the basement into interrogation cells. Barbie's methods were systematic. First, he analyzed every piece of intelligence about resistance activity in Lyon. He created charts showing connections between known resistance members. He identified patterns in their operations. He noticed something interesting. Many of the successful operations involved an American journalist named Virginia Hall, not as a participant, but as someone who'd been in Lyon when the operations occurred. Barbie ordered surveillance. His agents watched Hall's apartment. They followed her to cafes. They photographed her contacts. But Hall was careful. She never met the same person twice in the same location. She varied her routines. She used dead drops instead of face-to-face meetings. Barbie grew frustrated. He raided several safe houses, but Hall had already moved her operations. He arrested dozens of suspected resistance members, but none would talk. Then Barbie got creative. He planted Abbé Robert Alesch, a priest, into the resistance. Alesch was Gestapo, a collaborator who betrayed his country for money. Alesch travelled to Lyon in August 1942. He presented himself as a liaison from a Paris resistance network. He carried letters of introduction from people Hall knew. But Hall sensed danger. Something about Alesch didn't feel right. The way he asked too many questions. The way he seemed too eager for details. She gave him minimal information. False meeting locations. Names of people who didn't exist. 2 weeks later, news arrived from Paris. The resistance network Alesch claimed to represent had been destroyed. Dozens arrested. Alesch was Gestapo. Hall burned everything in her apartment that night. Documents, coded messages, photographs. She left Lyon without telling anyone. Not Jean Rousset. Not Germaine Guérin. Not even the American diplomat who'd helped her. She simply disappeared. By the time Barbie's agents raided her apartment the next morning, Hall was already 200 miles away. Barbie was furious. He'd come close. So close. He ordered wanted posters created. Based on descriptions from informants, an artist created a composite sketch. A woman's face. Estimated age, 35. Distinguishing feature, limps when walking. The posters went up across southern France, in German, French, and English. This woman who limps is one of the most dangerous Allied agents in France. We must find and destroy her. Underneath, a reward. 2 million francs. Enough money to live comfortably for years. Barbie's network of informants expanded. He had collaborators in every French police station. He had agents watching train stations, bus depots, and border crossings. He had wireless detection equipment searching for clandestine radio transmissions. For months, Barbie hunted the woman he called the limping Canadian bitch. He never learned she was American. He never discovered her real name. He never realized she'd already escaped France. Years later, after the war, a journalist asked Barbie if he remembered the limping lady. Barbie's expression hardened. "She made us look like fools," he said. 12 men escaped because of her. We had 500 agents searching. We never found her. The journalist asked why. Barbie's answer was simple. Because she was smarter than us. She understood something we didn't. That the best place to hide wasn't in darkness. It was in plain sight. By the time we realized that, Barbie continued, she was gone. What Barbie didn't know was that Hall's greatest operation in France was yet to come. By late 1942, Hall's Heckler network had coordinated arms drops across southern France. Her agents had mapped German troop positions from Toulouse to Geneva. She'd arranged the escape of 47 Allied airmen. She'd established communication routes that connected isolated resistance cells. And she'd done it all while hiding in plain sight, wearing dowdy clothes instead of her chic Parisian wardrobe, changing her appearance with makeup and wigs, becoming 4 different women in a single afternoon. But Barbie was getting close. His agents had infiltrated the resistance. A priest named Abbé Robert Allèche visited Hall in early November, claiming to represent a Paris network. Hall's instincts screamed danger. Within days, news arrived. The Paris network had been destroyed. Allèche was Gestapo. Hall burned her documents in a bathtub. She told no one where she was going, not even Jean Rousset or Germaine Guérin. She simply disappeared. On November 8, 1942, Hall boarded a train to Perpignan, the last stop before the Spanish border. The Pyrenees Mountains loomed ahead, 50 miles of frozen peaks, in November, with an 8-pound wooden leg. Hall had no illusions about what lay ahead. The Pyrenees crossing was considered one of the most dangerous escape routes in occupied Europe. Even experienced mountaineers avoided it in winter. The route climbed to 7,500 feet, through snow and ice, past German patrols on the French side, past Spanish border guards on the other. Many people died trying. Their bodies weren't found until spring thaw. Hall arrived in Perpignan on November 9th. She made contact with a local guide who specialized in smuggling people across the border. His fee was steep, 5,000 francs per person. The guide looked at Hall skeptically. "You understand the journey is difficult?" he asked. "Very difficult." Hall nodded. "I understand." "We leave before dawn," he said. "The crossing takes 3 days if weather cooperates." "Maybe 4. "We travel only at night near the border. Spanish patrols shoot smugglers." He paused. "Can you walk 50 miles? Hall smiled grimly. "I've walked farther." She didn't tell him about Cuthbert. That revelation would have ended the journey before it began. They left Perpignan at 3 a.m. on November 10th, 1942. Hall, the guide. 3 refugees desperate to escape France. The first day wasn't terrible. They followed shepherd paths through foothills. The terrain was rough but manageable. Hall's stump ached, but she'd felt worse. They rested in a barn that night. No fire, cold rations, a few hours of sleep. The second day was harder. The path climbed steeply. Snow appeared at higher elevations. The temperature dropped. Hall's prosthetic had no ankle joint. On level ground she could manage the distinctive gait, but climbing required a different technique. She had to swing Cuthbert sideways, plant it, pull herself up with her good leg, swing Cuthbert sideways again. The motion was exhausting. and slow. By midday, the guide was growing impatient. "We need to move faster," he said. "We're behind schedule." Hall didn't argue. She just kept climbing. The third day was agony. They'd reached the high passes. Snow was knee-deep in places. Wind cut through their clothes. Hall's stump was bleeding. The friction from the straps had worn away skin. Every step was torture. She could feel blood soaking into her sock. She could feel the wooden leg shifting in its harness. She could feel her strength fading. The guide noticed her struggling. "What's wrong?" he demanded. "Nothing," Hall said through gritted teeth. "Keep moving." But the guide wasn't stupid. He saw how she walked. He saw the pain in her face. At the next rest stop, he pulled her aside. "You're injured," he said. "Let me see." Hall knew she couldn't hide it anymore. If he discovered Cuthbert and decided she was slowing them down, he might abandon her, or worse. But she had no choice. She rolled up her pant leg. The guide stared at the wooden prosthetic, at the leather straps, at the blood-soaked stump. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he pulled out a canteen. "Clean the wound," he said. "Rewrap it. We still have 20 miles to go." Hall cleaned her stump as best she could. She rewrapped the straps. She took a moment to catch her breath. "Why didn't you tell me?" the guide asked. "Would you have taken me if I had?" The guide considered this. "No," he admitted. "I would have said it was impossible." "That's why I didn't tell you," Hall said. The guide smiled slightly. "You're either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both," Hall replied. They crossed into Spain on the fourth day. The border was unmarked, no fence, no signs. Just a ridge where France ended and Spain began. Hall stood on that ridge and looked back at France. Somewhere behind her, Klaus Barbie was hunting, 500 Gestapo agents searching, all of them looking for her. But she'd made it. The journey down the Spanish side was easier. Gravity helped instead of fighting. But Hall's strength was nearly gone. They reached Saint-Jouan-de-les-Abadesses late on November 13th. Hall could barely walk. Her stump was infected. She had a fever. She'd lost over 15 pounds. But she was alive. And she was free. Spanish police arrested her at the train station. Illegal border crossing. No papers. 6 weeks in a Figueres prison followed. Hall spent those weeks in a cold cell, with minimal food, with infected wounds that weren't treated, with the constant fear that Spain might deport her back to France. The American embassy in Madrid finally negotiated her release in late December. She arrived in London on January 19, 1943. SOE headquarters wanted to celebrate. Maurice Buckmaster called her crossing one of the most remarkable escapes of the war. King George VI wanted to award her the Member of the Order of the British Empire in a public ceremony. Hall declined the public ceremony. "I'd prefer to keep working," she said. "Public recognition would make that difficult." What she didn't tell them was that she was already planning her return to France. The SOE refused. "It's too dangerous," Buckmaster said. "Your face is on every wanted poster in southern France. The Gestapo knows you're alive. They'll be watching for you." "Then I'll make sure they don't recognize me," Hall said. But Buckmaster wouldn't budge. He'd already lost too many agents. He wasn't going to send one of his best back into certain death. So Hall went around him. She contacted the Office of Strategic Services, America's new intelligence agency. The OSS was desperate for experienced agents, especially agents who spoke French, especially agents who knew France. The OSS didn't care about British caution. They had a mission: prepare France for D-Day, and they needed someone who could organize resistance fighters behind German lines. Virginia Hall was perfect. The Office of Strategic Services, America's new spy agency, didn't share British caution. They needed experienced agents for the coming invasion of France. D-Day was being planned. The Allies would need resistance fighters to sabotage German reinforcements. In March 1944, Hall returned to France. This time, she looked nothing like the woman on Barbie's posters. Hollywood makeup artists had taught her to draw wrinkles on her face. She'd dyed her hair a dirty grey-black. A London dentist had filed down her white American teeth to resemble those of a French peasant. She shuffled instead of limping. The pain in her hip was excruciating, but it hid Cuthbert's telltale gait. She wore layers of peasant clothes that made her look 20 years older. Her cover identity was Marcel Montagne, an elderly widow. Her code name was Diane. Her mission was to prepare central France for D-Day. Hall couldn't parachute in because of Cuthbert. Instead, a Royal Navy motor gunboat deposited her on a Brittany beach, March 21, 1944, a moonless night. She waded ashore carrying a suitcase that contained the latest wireless radio technology. Hall made her way to Crozant, a village in central France. Population under 1,000, rolling farmland. Perfect for hiding in plain sight. She rented a small farm. She milked cows. She made cheese. She sold her cheese to German soldiers. And while she chatted with Wehrmacht officers about the weather and milk prices, she memorized their unit insignias, their movements, their morale. Every night she climbed into her barn's hayloft. There, hidden beneath hay bales, was her wireless radio. She powered it with a generator connected to her bicycle, pedaling in darkness, transmitting coordinates for weapons drops, organizing 3 battalions of resistance fighters. The Germans knew someone was transmitting. Their direction-finding equipment could locate her general area. So Hall moved constantly, barn to barn, farm to farm, always one step ahead. Between March and September 1944, Hall organized resistance networks across Haute-Loire. She coordinated the delivery of tons of weapons and supplies. She mapped drop zones for Allied commandos. She trained fighters in sabotage techniques. Her teams cut 16 railway lines. They derailed 8 freight trains. They blew up 4 bridges. They severed every telephone wire in the region. They killed 80 Germans while suffering only 12 casualties. And they did it under the command of a woman the local resistance fighters called the Old Milkmaid. Many never knew her real identity. The irony was perfect. The Gestapo's most wanted spy was selling cheese to their soldiers. As D-Day approached, Hall's intelligence became critical. She was the first agent to report that the German General Staff was relocating from Lyon to Le Puy. She provided exact coordinates for fuel depots. She identified ammunition storage facilities. She mapped German defensive positions. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces landed at Normandy. In central France, Hall's resistance fighters went into action. They destroyed bridges German reinforcements needed. They ambushed convoys racing north. They made every German movement costly. By September 1944, American troops reached Hall's region. Her mission was complete. She'd spent 3 years behind enemy lines. She'd built 2 major resistance networks. She'd organized thousands of fighters. She'd provided intelligence that saved countless Allied lives, and Klaus Barbie never caught her. President Harry Truman wanted to present Hall with the Distinguished Service Cross in a White House ceremony. It would be the first time a civilian woman received the medal, America's second highest military decoration. Hall refused. "I'd prefer something private," she told OSS Chief William Donovan. "I want to keep working." On September 27, 1945, in Donovan's office, with only Hall's mother present, she received the medal. The citation read, "Despite the fact that she was well known to the Gestapo, Miss Hall voluntarily returned to France in March 1944 to assist in sabotage operations against the Germans. Through her courage and physical endurance, even though she had previously lost a leg in an accident, Miss Hall succeeded in organising, arming and training 3 battalions. No photographs were allowed. No press coverage. Hall wanted to remain in the shadows, because the war might be over in Europe. But the CIA had just been created, and they needed people like Virginia Hall. She joined the Central Intelligence Agency in 1947, one of the first female operations officers in American intelligence history. But the peacetime CIA didn't know what to do with a woman who'd outsmarted the Gestapo. They assigned her to a desk, analysis, reports, bureaucracy. The woman who'd bicycled across occupied France with a wireless radio was stuck reviewing other people's intelligence. The woman who'd organised 3 combat battalions was told she couldn't work in the field. No one knew what to do with her, a CIA historian later admitted. Hall worked quietly until 1966, mandatory retirement at age 60. She moved to a farm in Barnesville, Maryland, with her husband, Paul Gouaillot, a French-American OSS officer she'd met during the war. She never talked about what she'd done. Not to friends, not to most of her family, not to the neighbours who saw her working in her garden. When people asked about her limp, she said she'd had an accident. It was a long time ago, she'd add, changing the subject. Virginia Hall died on July 8, 1982. She was 76 years old. Her obituary in the New York Times was brief. It mentioned her work for the OSS. It noted her Distinguished Service Cross. It didn't capture what she'd actually accomplished, because the full story remained classified for decades. Only in recent years have historians pieced together the scope of Hall's achievements. The CIA named a training facility after her. The Army Intelligence Center dedicated a dining hall to her memory. Books and films have finally told her story. But perhaps the most telling tribute came from an unexpected source. Decades after the war, a historian interviewed former Gestapo officers. When Virginia Hall's name was mentioned, one officer went pale. "We never found her," he said quietly. "We had hundreds of agents looking. Barbie was obsessed. But that woman, she was like smoke. Every time we thought we had her, she was already gone." The historian asked why the Gestapo considered her so dangerous. The officer's answer was simple: because she made us afraid. In our own territory. A woman with one leg made the Gestapo afraid. That fear was justified. Consider what Hall accomplished with nothing but courage, a bicycle, and Cuthbert. She operated behind enemy lines for 38 months total, longer than any other Allied agent in France. She built 2 major resistance networks that involved thousands of fighters. She coordinated the escape of dozens of Allied personnel. She provided intelligence that shaped Allied strategy. She personally organized sabotage operations that delayed German reinforcements during D-Day. And she did it all while being actively hunted by the most feared secret police in Europe. The Gestapo had advantages Hall could never match. They had unlimited resources. They had a network of informants across France. They had torture chambers and execution squads. They had the full power of the Nazi state. Hall had a wooden leg and a bicycle. Yet she won. Not through dramatic firefights or James Bond-style heroics, through patience, through careful planning, through the ability to become invisible in plain sight. She understood something the Gestapo didn't, that the best disguise isn't a false identity. It's becoming someone no one would suspect. An elderly milkmaid selling cheese. A dowdy journalist filing boring stories. A peasant woman shuffling through village squares. The Nazis were looking for a spy. Hall showed them someone beneath notice. Her success also revealed the Gestapo's fatal weakness. They couldn't imagine that someone they considered inferior could outwit them. A woman, an American, a person with a disability. Their prejudice blinded them. Barbie was so convinced Hall was Canadian that he never investigated American networks properly. He was so focused on finding a limping woman that he overlooked the shuffling peasant. He was so certain she'd been killed crossing the Pyrenees that he didn't prepare for her return. Every assumption he made was wrong, and Hall used each one against him. The story of Virginia Hall matters because it reveals an uncomfortable truth about intelligence work. The most effective spies aren't the ones with the best gadgets or the most elaborate covers. They're the ones with the courage to walk into danger and the discipline to stay there. Hall walked into danger in August 1941. She stayed there until September 1944. 38 months of looking over her shoulder. 38 months of knowing that one mistake meant torture and execution. 38 months of living with Cuthbert's constant pain. Most people couldn't handle 38 days, but Hall wasn't most people. She was the woman the State Department rejected for being disabled, the woman the Gestapo dismissed as Canadian, the woman Klaus Barbie called that bitch because he couldn't catch her. She was Virginia Hall, and she was precisely as dangerous as the Gestapo feared. More dangerous, actually, because while Barbie was hunting for a spy, Hall was building an army. While Gestapo agents were checking papers at roadblocks, Hall's resistance fighters were cutting railway lines. While Nazi officers were drinking in Germaine Guérin's brothel, her employees were reporting their every word. The Gestapo never stood a chance. They were fighting a ghost who could be anyone, a journalist, a milkmaid, a farm woman making cheese, and by the time they realized the ghost was real, American tanks were already rolling through France. Today, if you visit the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C., you can see Hall's wireless radio, the one she powered with her bicycle, the one she used to coordinate 3 battalions. You can see her false identification papers, Marcel Montagne, Marie Monin, Germaine, Diane. You can see the Distinguished Service Cross that President Truman wanted to present at the White House. The medal Hall insisted on receiving in private, but you can't see Cuthbert, because after Hall's death, Cuthbert disappeared. Some say it's in storage at a government facility. Others believe Hall's family kept it, but maybe that's fitting. The wooden leg that terrified the Gestapo remains hidden, just like the woman who wore it, hidden in plain sight, until the moment she chose to strike. That was Virginia Hall's genius. She didn't need to be invisible. She needed to be overlooked, and the Germans overlooked her until it was far too late. November 7th, 1942. A woman left Lyon by bicycle, one step ahead of Klaus Barbie. September 1944. American forces liberated that same city. In the 22 months between those dates, the Gestapo launched their largest manhunt in France. Thousands of agents, millions of francs in rewards, every resource the Reich could spare. They never found her. Instead, Hall found them. On bridges, her saboteurs destroyed. On railways, her fighters cut. In fuel depots, her teams burned. And in the faces of German officers who suddenly realized their reinforcements weren't coming, because somewhere in the French countryside, an old woman selling cheese had made sure of it. Klaus Barbie survived the war. He fled to South America. He was eventually arrested and tried for war crimes. In 1987, during his trial in Lyon, a journalist asked if he remembered the limping lady. Barbie's expression hardened. "I remember we never caught her," he said. "That's all I'll say." It was the only time during his trial that Klaus Barbie admitted defeat, because even 45 years later, the memory still stung. The butcher of Lyon, defeated by a woman with a wooden leg, the most feared Gestapo chief in France, outwitted by someone his own prejudice told him couldn't possibly be dangerous. Barbie died in prison in 1991. The woman he hunted had already been dead for 9 years, but her legacy lived on. In the CIA training facility that bears her name, in the generations of intelligence officers who study her methods, in every person who refuses to let others define their limitations. Virginia Hall proved that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing it anyway. She was terrified crossing the Pyrenees. She was terrified returning to France in 1944. She was terrified every time she powered up that wireless radio. But she did it, because the mission mattered more than the fear. That's the real lesson of Virginia Hall's story. Not that she was superhuman, but that she was human. Flesh and blood and pain and doubt. And Cuthbert. Always Cuthbert. The wooden leg that the State Department said made her unsuitable. The prosthetic that the Gestapo used to identify her. The 8-pound piece of wood that climbed the Pyrenees. Cuthbert became Hall's greatest asset because it forced her to be creative, to find solutions others wouldn't consider, to become someone the Germans couldn't imagine. The State Department was right about one thing. Virginia Hall was unsuitable. Unsuitable for a desk in Warsaw. Unsuitable for the quiet diplomatic life she'd once wanted. She was built for something far more important. She was built to win a war. One bicycle ride at a time, one safe house at a time, one resistance fighter at a time, until the day American tanks rolled into Lyon and the Gestapo fled, until the day France was free again, until the day Klaus Barbie had to face the fact that he'd been beaten by the woman he never caught. Virginia Hall, the spy with the wooden leg, the woman who fooled the Gestapo's generals. They never expected her. That was their first mistake. They underestimated her. That was their last.